Cool. Welcome everybody in the, what's it called, like the happy hump day, happy hump session, right? After lunch, everybody's had their nap, and it's before the last session, so you're all awake, I think. I'm awake, I think. Yeah, so welcome. My name's Peter Judge. I'm going to be talking today about OOABL for everyday use. And the focus here is mainly going to be on, maybe the demos mainly are going to be on working with procedural code, existing applications, and OO, but just in general OO stuff. So a bit of an outline of what OO is. I'll throw in some opinions like I usually do. I'll try some live coding demos. If you've seen my sessions before, you know how well they go. Narrator, not very, but I'll do my best. Yeah. So we'll get started. That's me. I've been at consulting work for a couple of years now. Previously, I was at Progress for almost 20. I've got to be nice about Progress because there's some Progress folk in the room. No, just kidding. I was there for a while. I'm mainly a 4GL, ABL application developer guy. I ended up doing a lot of work on PAS-OE migrations, and yeah, so now I do more or less the same stuff, just with a different shirt on. Been working in Progress for some time. Not as long as everybody. I see some older people here. Not older in years, but older in Progress terms. Just be careful. Yeah. So I work at consulting work. We're a software consulting house, development vendor, focus mainly on open edge stuff, so application development, but also front ends, and build pipelines, DevOps, Docker, all of those fun things. Our head office is in Cologne in Germany. I am the US office in Boston, and we have a UK branch, we have a Romanian branch, and we work with a variety of European partners as well. Again, mainly open edge related technologies. The laundry list, I think I'm the first consulting work speaker today, so I can dwell on them, and all the others will be more or less the same, but yeah. As I said, mainly development, mainly 4GL, ABL development, DevOps as well, which is also a fun game. And by fun, I mean not fun, but. So today I'm going to look a little bit about intro to ABL, kind of some patterns and practices, I guess potted pieces of ABL or OOABL, and then walk a little bit through using it in a procedural way, or from a procedural point of view. How many of folks are using, how many of you have got pure, mainly ABL, mainly OO applications running? Don't be shy, put your hands up, it's good. It's a good thing. All right, so 10% of the room maybe. How many of you aren't using OO at all in your applications? Nobody, awesome, cool. So this is either going to be a very quick or a very long presentation. Nice. Okay, so the object-oriented extensions to the ABL is the official name, was the official name Progress gave to OOABL back in 19 years ago. Those of you that are using it, how many have been using it since the beginning that you know of, since 2005, 2006? One? Oh, yeah. Lots of updates over time. You can kind of see on the left's the 10 series, the middle's the 11s, the 12s on the right. And in the 10s, there was a lot of, let's make this thing work. So there's much more than I put on there. Stuff like static stuff and structured error handling, as I said, a whole bunch of stuff. .NET integration's a fun one because that allowed the product called the GUI for .NET to be released. So it means you can build Windows GUIs using .NET controls in an open edge application framework, right? You don't have to use the open client. And that's the gift that honestly keeps giving, because now in 12.8, Progress have released a version of Open Edge that can talk to .NET Core and also on Linux. So obviously you can't use the UI controls on Linux on your PAS-OE server, but you will be able to use various .NET components with the OOABL, which is nice. 11 was a bit of a sad time. There wasn't much done in the OO. The biggest thing was serialization, which is really useful, especially when you're working with 4GL clients, ABL clients. So how many of your applications are mainly, or have ABL front ends? about half. So that means the rest of you are using some form of a web-based front-end, RESTful something. Yeah, something like that. Cool. Cool. So the serialization was really useful for being able to throw errors across the app server boundary and have them be caught on the client without you having to manually serialize them and deal with return error and the return value and the no error and all of that nonsense, which was not fun. Any ADM2 scars here from working with error handling in? I see one. At least one, yeah. If error status error equals true and return value is greater than then return error, blah, 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 return value. Fun, wasn't it? 12.3, in the 12 series, a lot of work's gone in, a lot of extensions, package protection, touch on that a little bit, but methods for callbacks. So for the longest time, there was a bunch of places where you had to use a procedure, a .p. You couldn't use pure OO. You still can't use pure OO, by which I mean everything is OO. There's a couple of places where there's .ps, and I don't expect Progress to change that. The conversations that we've had collectively as a community over the years on things, there's bits that won't change, which is cool. Property overriding in 12.5, which is really nice. And 12.5, 6, and 7 generic collections came in, which were really, really nice and provided the foundation for even more generic extensions. And if you were in Rob's keynote or Rob's roadmap earlier today, he talked a little bit about user-defined generic classes. The more to come stuff, if you want to see what's happening there and be part of that, influence that, sign up for the CVP, the OpenEdge CVP, and a lot of stuff is discussed on there behind a quasi-NDA of some description, but a lot of the development happens, you have a chance to influence the development of the Progress product there, which is nice. Cool. All right. So why should you use OOO? Firstly, there's the garbage collector, which gets you out of the whole hellscape of finding memory leaks because you've got a persistent procedure running or you've got a dynamic temp table that's in memory somewhere and you don't know where it is and your app server hangs because it's all full of garbage. The garbage collector in OO can help you with a lot of that stuff. We'll touch on some patterns or some practices in there. I should say, I'm going to state some opinions in here. You're more than welcome to disagree with me, and in fact, please do, if you think that mine are, well, I'm never wrong, but if they're not quite correct, I am always wrong. Objects passed by reference is another good reason. If you take a look at passing temp tables around, for instance, and you turn on the temp table logging, by default, they get passed by value. What does that mean? That every time you pass a temp table into another procedure or another function or another method, a new copy of that data is made every single time, which is expensive to do if you've got a big temp table full of stuff, whatever that stuff is. Everybody's got big temp tables full of stuff. I know that for a fact. Sometimes you have more stuff in there than you think's in there, but that's even worse. But yeah, so objects passed by reference means that basically like passing a handle around, only how many bytes it takes to pass the reference around, and the data doesn't get copied from place to place to place to place. So that can save you time, save you performance, save you memory, all good things. And the other reason for why should I use O is because the compiler can make you look less stupid or make you make fewer mistakes. Was it like 5 years ago? Everybody's talking about shift left, shift left, shift left, right? That was the thing with DevOps. And so this just means that you can catch errors quicker. You can find programming errors faster than you could otherwise. Does this class exist in ProPath, right? Today you can say run foo.p. Foo.p doesn't exist. The only time you find out about it is at runtime. Right? So your users get upset with you. Compiler can help you find things like it. Is the class there, or the type there, I should say? Is the method I'm calling there? Am I allowed to call it, right? So it may be there, but you may not have access to it. Can I pass the parameters? So the name might be there, the parameter list might be different. All these things are really nifty for finding any issues you have in your code. So just a quick definition. I'll see if my pointy thing works. So you'll often hear in OO terms people talk about strong typing. What does that mean? So a type, and again, it gets nice and esoteric. If you go to, I don't know, Wikipedia or Stack Overflow and you look what a type is, there will be lots of discussion about it. But basically, a type is a thing that can take requests. And a request is just a call from another piece of code, right? So there are 3 types in progress or in OpenEdge: classes, interfaces, enums. There may or may not be other ones coming in the future. You'll have to go to the CVP and find out. Huh. There we go. I'll take my check afterwards, yeah. Nah, just kidding. Strong typing means the compiler enforces the type, which means that, as I said, it exists. You can call it. You can call it in the way you want to call it. Talk about a member. Member is the stuff inside of a class or a type. Methods, properties, variables, buffers, temp tables, data sets, constructors, destructors, all of those things are collectively known as members. Access control says who can see this. Who's allowed to call this particular member? Could be a class, could be a method, could be a property, could be a variable. How many of you guys have used the private keyword in an internal procedure? Wow. How many times does it do what you think it does? Does it behave the way you want it to behave? Nah. So that was the attempt in the procedural days of doing that sort of stuff. Again, with the ADM2 war stories, but in my time at Progress, when we used to get tech support requests for people who patched and changed internal procedures in the ADM2 super procedure stack, and things suddenly stopped working, it was horrendous, and you couldn't stop them doing it because it's all just an internal procedure, right? Why are you calling that from here? Because I can. Access levels help you with that. So, onto a type, a class. A class is a type with runnable code. It's really the only type with executable code in it. A abstract class is a type that you can't instantiate, so you can't run it, you can't new it, but it may have executable code in it, may not, but typically it does. Static members are a special kind of member in a class. There's no such thing as a static class in the ABL, but people often refer to classes with static members in them as statics, but there's no such thing. Interface is a member with only is a member with public members. It's a type with public members. It's not executable, and it is one of my favorite things in OO. I will go on for hours about how much I love them because they really let you build flexible applications, frameworks, whatever you're building. An enum or an enumeration kind of is 2 things, but as a type, it's a type with a bunch of strongly typed, it's a type with basically name-value pairs, but that you can work with in a strongly typed way. Previously, we all did it. We used preprocessors for these things, passed them around as integer parameters, and then we're surprised when somebody passed a value we weren't expecting into that internal procedure and things fell apart. So enums help you with that. Generics are new in, 12.5, the first one came out, generic list. It's a type that gets its strong typing basically at runtime. So you don't have to write a particular class with a strong type or particular type. You can reuse a set of code and give it a different constraint at runtime or in your code. And an object, that's just a running class. Object instance, object reference. It's not the hard-coded or the written definition of the thing. One back. So again, most of you are using this, so this is going to be fairly quick, but maybe just for recap. So a type has got a package and a base name, the name of the class, the name of the enum, and then a package, a dotted notation preceding it. It's possible, you can have them without a package. You should not do that. I would say you must not do that in production code. It's just going to cause you a world of pain downstream. So always give it a nice namespace effectively for your code. So that way you know that your code is consulting by code and not Progress code or anybody else's code, Bob's code, something like that. I'll just pick on Bob because he's there. The names, how many of you have written internal procedures with names with spaces in them? I know you've done them. I've seen them before in tech support calls. Internal procedures, you can give a blank name. say procedure, quote, space, quote, and that's a legitimate procedure name in the ABL. Do not do that, please. And if you do, don't tell people where you heard that, because they'll come and hunt me down and kill me. But you can have really bad names in the procedural world. OO, tighten that up considerably. You can use alphanumerics and I think one of 5 special characters. The rules for the underscore are still there for the package names, the class names. So there's a special parameter, there's special behavior in the runtime that Progress put in. Wow, here's the pop quiz. When did Progress put that in? For ADM2 as well, maybe? ADM1, maybe? You can get around it with minus ZN, but also, if you're trying to find special cases to do special things, you should probably think about why you're naming a thing that way. Packages let you group stuff in various ways. That's also another couple of hours worth of conversation about why should you name your package a particular way. So you could name it for an application architecture layer, front end, back end, might be legitimate. You might layer it vertically, as in, these are my customer services. So consultingwork.customer.blah, or something else. If you sell software as a package, you might have consultingwork.general ledger, consultingwork.accounts receivable, blah, 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 something like that, and then split them further in there. How you decide what that is really up to you and your application and the person who's putting that together, the way their brain works, because everybody comes up with different ones. But my point is really do that. Definitely do that and have a consistent standard for that. And that becomes more useful later on, but it's really good for having those good conventions. You can't use the word progress as the first package. Level, layer, whatever you want to call it, Progress reserves that for their own use. They don't reserve com.progress or org.progress or something like that. I'm just saying that again, don't use that because that will confuse people. Progress also uses OpenEdge. So even the ABL that Progress ships cannot use the word Progress as the first package name. So it uses OpenEdge. Anybody can do that. Again, I would recommend you pick something else. Right? The whole point of namespaces and packages is to avoid conflicts between different sets of code. So if you don't want your code conflicting with the code Progress ships or somebody else ships, yeah. People might do that if they want to override. So classes are just subject to ProPath like any other executable ABL code. If you want to override some of the behavior that, I'm just picking on Progress because the OpenEdge name is here, that they provide, you can hypothetically create a class called OpenEdge.something.something, which will, and put that earlier in ProPath, which will then be run instead of the version Progress ships. There are some limited reasons to do that. Very, very limited. Again, it's with the, get on the call with tech support and they're going to be like, that's not our code, that's your code. Why are you doing that? And to be honest, moving forward, Progress released in 12.7, I believe, a new archive, APL. I don't know what the A stands for, like a procedure library, which you can sign and you can use to restrict our code from ProPath. So there's potential that you won't be able to run that code anyway. Again, as I've mentioned, my recommendation is use your company name or your business unit as the first thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be the company name, but have a logical grouping for your packages. Otherwise, you're going to land up in pain later. Even the second layer down. We're working on a project at the moment where we're building a payment system, and we know that in the future we're going to land up probably doing more stuff for this particular customer. So we kind of have company name dot payments, payment singular, as one level package, and then we'll have a company dot common or for another level to kind of separate it out. Again, it makes life easier for building stuff. It makes life easier for logically understanding the flow of the code. Anybody disagree? Or any other strong opinions? Because again, this is a space where people have thoughts and feelings on the subject. Okay, so a class, a type, is just a piece of our code at runtime, or at compile time really. Types must end with CLS, not the magical world of anything, like we can do with procedures. And the path on disk of the class, of the type, is the package name. So for instance, we have a class called you're going to work, consultingwork.oera.businessentity. And on disk, it lives in that path, but we only need to put the root into our pro path. And that's good, or very different from procedural code, where you can run it. You could just compile that whole thing and then say, okay, just run businessentity.r without any relative paths. That you can't do. Types can go into the procedure libraries and the packages, and you can shorten the usage in your code with a using statement, which effectively is just syntactic sugar. It just expands it under the covers, but it just makes life easier when you've got longer and more descriptive class names and package names and deep hierarchies. You land up with yay long things. Define variable O class name as package name. It just helps with that. Okay, so defining classes, easy peasy. Class statement, there's a couple of options. Inherits is the fun one. Who's heard of the fun game or been on Stack Overflow or wherever? So is a square a circle? Sorry, is a square a rectangle? Is a rectangle a square, right? Or a circle an ellipse or whatever. Getting your inheritance right can be tricky in terms of the behavior that trickles down through your classes, right? So the intent is always you start with a base class and you expand it a little bit and expand it a little bit and expand it a little bit, and sooner or later you have 10 layers of classes that do what you want, but get to the point of, now I want to add some behavior. Where do I add it? How do I extend this whole pile? We're not really going to talk about that today, but there's other ways of making more flexible compositions or components or building more flexible classes out of other sets of behavior than inheritance. But in every inheritance, like static instances, is everybody's first child, right? Everybody builds them. Everything inherits from progress lang object, kind of like in Java lang object, kind of like in .NET, and even in the .NET Bridge stuff. Progress inserts progress lang object above system.object. Generally speaking, shallow inheritance is better performant, and again, just makes development and maintenance of your code base a little easier over time. If you look at some of the front-end components, like the infragistics controls, you'll see they're like 10 or 12 layers deep with components upon component upon component. And I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I'd read somewhere that UI fits better into the OO paradigm model than back-end business logic. I guess you can kind of see it with those stacks. But generally, I don't know, 4 deep is probably where you want to start asking yourself, do I need to do this anymore? And that's just a thumbs up. 4, 5. When you're sitting at 10, I think then you're trading on a bit of thin ice. Let me go back. The other bits and pieces in here, implements interfaces. We'll get on those in a sec. Abstract and final. So final class just means that nobody else can inherit from you. Abstract means that I can't instantiate this class, but I can inherit from it. So you can't have an abstract final class. That would be silly. And wouldn't work. Serializable, again, lets you pass that object across a wire, a progress wire in particular. So from the app server to the client to the app server, and progress will do the whole marshalling and putting it into a binary format and sending it across and doing all of the hard work so you don't have to. Generally, you want to use the progress stuff as far as possible because it's written in C, not in ABL. That tends to run faster, and it's not your problem when it breaks. Well, it's your problem, but progress has to fix it. You don't have to fix it. So generally, I kind of lean on that. Serializable is great. Serializable doesn't unfortunately work when you're returning an object back from a web request, right? Then you've got to turn it into JSON or into bytes or into whatever else the format might be. Cool. Use widget pools, also your friend. Widget pools are, who has had fun with widget pools in the past? I use the word fun very loosely. Who's tangled with them? So widget pools is a kind of sorta-ish garbage collector for some handles, sometimes. I have feelings about that too, but I won't go into them. But Use widget pools, generally a good thing to have on your class definitions if you've got dynamic handles in there. If you're going to be working with something like a sax parser or a DOM X document, something like that, just put that on there and it will clean. When the class is garbage collected, any of the handles that are scoped effectively to that object will be garbage collected for you, and less memory leaks is a good thing, generally. Yeah. You buzz at me. So access levels, I mentioned a bit. What can call the code? How do you get to the code? And there's a few of them. The compiler enforces them again. Like I say, I like the compiler. It tells me when I'm making mistakes. You don't have to specify an access level on a variable definition, a property, whatever, but they vary, the defaults vary. They're mostly public, but variables are private. Our coding convention at consulting work is sometimes to put them on. So for variables, when they're private, we don't need to. My personal opinion is that you should always put them on because it's very clear what the access level is of what you're dealing with. It just removes a bit of cognitive load from your head, and off you go. Generally with access levels, you want to be as restrictive as possible to start with, and because it's easy to open them up later. If you have a public method and you decide, I don't actually want anybody touching that, turning it private or protected after the fact is much harder. Well, it is harder. Generally, if you are all doing everything in-house, well then, yeah, I suppose you can get away with changing that stuff and refactoring it on the fly. If you're delivering software in a package like we do, it can hurt people quite badly downstream. So think carefully about what you want to make public is really the way to think about that. And generally, that somewhat ties in with interfaces. So interfaces, everything is public. So basically, if you have a class that implements an interface, only those methods should be public. You shouldn't make anything else public, really. Protected is a good default. Protected is also good because it enables a lot more unit testing downstream. So you can potentially take a class if you want to unit test the protected methods. Progress lets you, or the OpenEdge lets you extend a class and loosen up the thing. So if you've got a method that's, I don't know, convert JSON to an object, or convert JSON to a request object, that's a protected method in a web handler. Initialize request arguments is one of the ones we use to do something like that. That's a protected method in our web handler. When we test that, we basically extend the web handler and make the method public. And so we can call it from the outside publicly. Everything else works through inheritance. So protected generally is a good default for that sort of stuff. Yes? No? Everybody's more or less agreeing. This is going well. Okay, so a pretty picture, shamelessly stolen from Progress's documentation site. I just changed X's to ticks. The three biggies are private, protected, public. Public, everybody can see. Private, nobody can see except you. You're going to use private stuff generally for... So if you start with the thought process of protected is a good start, private is going to be your methods that are really tightly bound into that class. Right? You don't want anybody messing with them. They're, I don't know, finding a record on a buffer that's passed in, that's local to, there's a local buffer in a class, something like that. You're going to want to make those private. Package private means private to the class, but public to any classes in the same package. So there's another reason why packages are important. I don't believe you can make package private or package protected access levels in classes that don't have a package, which kind of makes sense. It's got to be exactly the same package, but this is good for places where you deliver a framework, for instance, where you deliver components of code, and you want to say, okay, it's sometimes called friend protection in other languages, but you just want this set of friends, this set of classes to be able to access each other. I don't want you to touch my code, I can touch my code. That's kind of the thought there. Yeah, static members. Yay, statics. Everybody else. The second favorite child after deep inheritance trees. So static members, again, as I said, there's no static classes. They allow access to members without having an object reference, without having an explicit object reference or any other object reference. So all members can be made static. That includes constructors. You can't have a static destructor. So when you reference a static member for the first time, the runtime instantiates the class or the static parts of the class and runs, if there's a static constructor, will run that. So you could use a static constructor for initializing things, right? You may want to load a config off disk. You may want to populate a temp table with something. All of the calling things, can be static, and you'd call them like my example there. Oh, that's what the buzz was for. No, that's not what the buzz was for. But kind of show error messages, right? Error helper is a type name, it's a class name, and you call a method on it, we pass stuff in. Very handy for things like this where you don't really care to have an object reference. You can, but you've got to define a variable, blah, blah, blah. Temp tables can be static as well. So usually the temp tables are scoped kind of to the instance or to the object, really. You can have static temp tables, and they have many uses. They're good for caches that you load once in a session. They're good for a variety of things. It's kind of out of scope here a little bit, but you can have static temp tables as well. They are extremely useful, extremely easy to use. They are also, like everything that's very easy to use, very subject to abuse. People use them for all sorts of kind of things. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was talking to them about static stuff, and they said, you can think of like a static property, static variable, kind of as a replacement for a global shared variable, if you roll that way. Whose application does not have any global shared variables or shared variables in it? One hand in the room. Right, we've all had them, we've all used them. You can logically think of them the same way. And static members, methods like that, you can kind of sort of think as a globally scoped function, or maybe internal procedure that's running in your session super procedure stack somewhere. This just gives you a little more insight as to where that thing actually lives if you want to go and debug it. Debugging super procedure stacks is also no fun. Generally, you'll see in that case, our naming convention calls those helpers. We have a variety of those for doing all sorts of things. And that's a good use case, right? It's kind of like, you kind of want to think of it as almost like a pure function. Shouldn't keep any state between when you call it and when you exit the method. It just does what it does and backs out and is finished with it, right? Really shouldn't use them for keeping state or whatever. That's just going to cause you pain downstream. You also shouldn't use them to hold, well, you can use them to hold references to objects, but you shouldn't use them, must not use them, I'll strongly opinionate that one, as you should not, must not, however you want to put it, use them for singletons. That also just hurts you long term. And a lot of the pain you get out of working with static things where there's state involved, by state I mean there's values that other pieces of the application depend on, it's going to be when you're testing your code, particularly unit tests, because you don't know what state 3 tests ago shoved in there, and now you're trying to test that this thing's working and it's just dirty and messy. So keep them as far as possible to useful functions. There are cases where you can use them for context in an application, like in a request on an app server. You may set the user's context, the username, something like that, their email at the beginning of the request and clear it at the end. So you expect it to be there. But you have to think a bit carefully about how often you use them and what you use them for. Yeah. All right. My favorite part. So one of the really nice things that the type checking gives you, because we've got these, I call them contract types, interfaces and abstract classes, they're both a way to define an API of programming, right? So you can say, this behavior is represented by this type, by this interface. I have an interface that represents addresses, or I have an interface that represents a particular piece of behavior. And generally, this lets you get to a place where you have lots of small interfaces, and each one does a specific job or represents a specific piece of functionality. Obviously, an interface cannot do work itself, but you could say that's to do with working with addresses, that's to do with working with, I don't know, contacts or something along those lines. So that's really nice because, firstly, the compiler knows that a class, when you implement an interface either in a class or in its hierarchy, the compiler knows that that class can do this piece of work as represented by its members. So that's really useful. And that means you can pass around a big object into a method that expects only a small piece of that function of that functionality represented by the object. And so then you can just work on that piece. So for instance, if you pass a buffer around into a procedure or into a method, the whole buffer is available, right? Or a temp table handle or whatever. All of the fields are available. And even though the method is update address, there's nothing stopping that code from changing the customer number or whatever it might be. So this lets you narrow that scope down. Abstract methods is abstract classes rather, is another way of doing it. Abstract classes can have public or protected methods. If you can have them public methods, then use an interface instead. Just buys you a little flexibility. And yeah, gives you a similar set of functionality more on the inside, right? Because you can have a protected method so that an implementer has to implement that. So for instance, in our business components, business entities, we have a couple of methods that are abstract because we know that every single business entity, business logic service is going to have its own specific implementation for that functionality. Generally, I think you want to go interfaces. They also buy you things like componentizing things, building, it separates the implementation from the definition. And so you get into the world of service containers and service managers that build your objects based on certain criteria. But use them. That's like, if you just build piles of objects, you're going to land in pain. Is there a comment or a question? Nope. Good. Oh, this is not a jumpy thing. All right. Collections. How many of you folk have written your own collections in OOABL? Yeah, fair number. Us too. Collections are really cool. They're basically like temp tables with strong typing. By that I mean you can only put objects of a certain type into them. But they're a blob of things, a collection, a set I've got to be careful with. A number of objects of the same type that you can work with and pass around and for each iterate over. Different kinds, lists, sets, maps, or dictionaries, they all have different constraints. So a list is like an array, it's numbered by order. Sets have got unique objects in them. How it decides what's unique is an implementation detail. I'll use that instead of it depends. An implementation detail, depending on the set. So if you write your own, you will likely have one way of looking at them, potentially looking at toString, potentially looking at property values. If you use the generic collections that Progress shipped in the list or the sets with 12.6, there is a very specific set of interfaces you have to implement that define what is unique, and also, coincidentally, a sort order. Maps are just key value pairs, which is nifty. So effectively, it's effectively two synchronized collections. The keys are a set, and then there's a matching collection. All very useful. They don't really replace temp tables. So in other languages, you're going to find things like big collections full of records, data rows, right? Get me the orders for this customer. They're going to give you an object back, which has got a collection, or you're going to get a collection object of customers. That customer might have a collection of orders on it, and it's all kind of an object in memory. I would not use OO collections for that. It's expensive, it's somewhat slow, and the 4GL ABL is really good at working with data. Like for each temp table is going to beat the pants off iterating through an object or collection any day of the week. Where they are useful is for small subsets of functionality. If you're building some kind of a logical representation, maybe of a UI thing or Request objects often have them, kind of things. You're going to have collections like that. And whichever one you choose to use, you need a iterator or enumerator, depending. Progress calls them iterators. They follow the Java-ish naming conventions on that side. We call them enumerators. We follow the C# naming convention-ish side of things. It's the same thing. It's basically a buffer or a for each over the collection. Unfortunately, you can't for each over a collection in the progress world either. I know people have asked for that on the ideas space. It's just a different paradigm of working with iterating through the data. All right. So procedures and objects. There was one application, maybe two, that was purely OO. So one of the fantastic things about the OO implementation is that it kind of seamlessly interoperates with the procedural side of things. So it gives you an opportunity to build out the knowledge, especially if you've got developers that have been working on the application for decades, and they're used to working with procedural code, working with procedural paradigms and working in that world. How do you get them to OO land? And you kind of want to get, I think you want to get them to OO land partly because OO gives you some of those benefits, the object, the garbage collection, the strong typing, some other bits and pieces. But also because that's kind of where developers today learn, right? Yeah. I mean, I think I learned Pascal, which was not object-oriented, but then Turbo Pascal came along and there were T's in there and that confused the hell out of me for a while. But yeah, people learn programming today in object-oriented terms. Progress ships more of its code in object-oriented terms. When they delivered the Kafka integration, that was as objects, as classes. So you're going to kind of have to get used to working with them. You're going to kind of have to use them in various bits and pieces in your application. One of the really big use cases, one of the really useful use cases, I think, is being able to pass objects as parameters. So we can build an object that represents a parameter. So in the classic world, in the procedural, pure procedural world, if you wanted to add, if you have an internal procedure and you want to call it with, I don't know, 5 pieces of data, right? You have a filter, you have a query, a query procedure. You're going to pass a customer number and a start date and an end date and a, I don't know, order status. Those 4, for instance, right? You pass those in. Now you want to add a 5th one. So now you've got to go and change the procedure and then everything that calls it. Because unfortunately in procedural world, unlike in OO, there's no overloads. So we can't have one procedure name with different sets of parameters. Parameter objects give you a really nice way of getting out of that world. So you can pass one object in, you always pass the same object in, but you can potentially extend it to add other parameters and deal with it that way. We still have to use OO in a couple, procedures in a couple of places. Callbacks to things like the SAX parser. For the longest time, you had to use a .p and pass stuff through to an object if you had an object model of that. Progress has incrementally updated or removed that restriction, so you can now just subscribe directly with an OO method. Yeah, it's a method, which is great. I don't think there's many left. I think there's a couple left, but that kind of stuff, and that Progress keeps churning on at those over time. App server event procedures, your activate, deactivate, that sort of stuff has to be a .p. Your application startup, so you can't have a prowin-cls and give it a class name. There's no concept for those of you that have worked with Java or C# of a main block in a class that runs automatically as a startup. Shared variables were excluded from objects or from classes, which I think is great. At some point in time, we've got to get away from them. We've got to move. So you can't define shared variables in a class, so you can't reference them in the class. You've got to use different things. Typically, a way people have got around that is you have a static procedure which kind of wraps a persistent procedure .p in it. So you call the static class or static property, which goes and fetches the value from the .p. It gets a bit complicated, but Now you just have that one place to call. You can remove your includes. And classic publish and subscribe is not supported in classes. So you can't subscribe to a publish anywhere kind of method. But largely, most of the sticking points have moved away over time. Cool. Did I miss any of those? For those of you that worked with .ps, I think that was all the places you still have to use .ps or procedures. You can use includes. You can do fun things as well in the class. So if you're working with DLLs, for instance, I don't know, Win32 API or whatever, you can define the procedure hertz. So you can say procedure, I don't know, get directory structure in kernel 32.dll. You can have a procedure definition inside of your class and then run it. That's the only that's the only procedure you can define. That's the only other member in a class that you can have, but you can't access it from outside. That's just purely private and purely a way to get the DLL connection working, if you need it. Do a lot of you work with DLLs? Calls out into some Windows API kind of stuff or SSL kind of stuff or fun things like that? Yeah. Cool. All right. So we've got a little bit of time left. So you get to watch me demo or play. So I was just going to walk through a little bit, kind of building up some objects and working with them in a procedural manner. We can touch on a couple of these things, generic collections and otherwise. One of the nice things, and I didn't talk. Oh, because I'm sitting on my cable, right. I didn't talk about it much. One of the nice things with the interaction between the procedural and the object world is we can take advantage, abuse maybe, the garbage collector to help us clean up our code a bit. This can become a little bit risky. So I believe one of the reasons why Progress didn't add garbage collector support to handle-based things when they added the garbage collector was that it's utterly unclear where the dependencies on those handles are in your application. So if they delete a procedure at the end of a run, if you run persistent set h, handle whatever, and when do you garbage collect that? But in an application, we can do things like mem pointers is another thing that need cleaning up all the time. You can potentially wrap them in an object and use that object as long as you want, and when the object goes away, the object will get garbage collected. And when the garbage collector runs, the destructor runs, and in the destructor you can say, okay, I'm going to delete this procedure because I know nobody else is using it. And so that's kind of a way to work around some of the challenges we have with handle-based things, temp tables, persistent procedures, whatever it might be. There are some things, I talked about the widget pool, there are some things that don't go into the widget pool. Only some handle-based things go in there. Yeah. Okay, so we will go to here. Hopefully you can read that okay at the back of the room. I did look earlier. Yeah, good. And you've got the screens as well if need be. Right, so I'm going to build this in VS Code. I have a project somewhere. Let me just... boink. Close all of that. I'll just open a new... What are we going to open here? I have a new class. And we're going to call it, I don't know, my parameter object. Cool. All right, so go away. So we have a parameter object. It's got some stuff in it. I'll take the consulting work bits out because we don't need them yet. Just built a class. And again, kind of just to... So for all of my don't do it, don't create classes without packages. What have I done? I'm going that this is a demo. And I'll just stick with that story. But we can see where we now, not Scratch, we want to go into, nope. So we can see that it hasn't compiled. Why is it not compiled? Judge's law. Every demo turns into a debugging demo at some point. Thank you. Line 36. 26. Hello. So, yeah, that was that one. 26, unable to from. That is that one. Thank you for finding that. My templates are a little shonky. So when that eventually wakes up again, /everyday. Right, so we have our code in the same folder. Why is it complaining now? No, you lied to me. It's compiled. Oh, because it's got to compile 107,000 files first. That will not take as long as you think, he said, dooming it to take 4 hours. But again, if we create a new class, no, not like that. If we create a new one with an actual package, which is what I should have done. New file from template. Well, so much for my Visual Studio Code. Is much faster than Progress Developer Studio throwaway line I was going to put in there. Wow. Hello. So, right. Well, I will carry on with this one while that works. There's enough sessions running there. But that's not going down. Why is that not going down? It would have popped up an error if there was a database error. So it's not turning into a debugging session. I will just write code and you can be like, yes, Peter, your code's perfect. It'll compile fine, right? Let's go with that. Yeah, so class our code in the directory where it goes. Notice we've got a public constructor. We're going to add a method. Method public void, whatever. We'll just go with something that is meaningful for me today. Oh, that's why, because it was trying to connect to that. That's what it was trying to do. Because my VPN isn't connected, or my VPN isn't connected. Okay, so please work should now work. Okay, now it's compiled and done its thing. Great. Again, add our access levels, and that's our parameter object. I'm going to add a file. I'm going to call whatever. No. No. Everybody loves watching demos. Everybody hates doing, no, not everybody hates doing them, but some of us like doing them less, right? So, my parameter, there we go. My good friend Codium helps sometimes. And then sometimes it doesn't, right? So it's only relatively smart. That's just auto-suggested. My parameter is new. My parameter object, right? Found a bug in Jill's code. Excellent, not in my code. Okay, so we can run it and we can say whatever message. My parameter object, please work. And it fails. Why is it failing? Because, I'm guessing because I've got a void. Exactly. All right, so now it works. Great. Again, with just the copy pasta. And we're not going to be able to access nope here. even if we type it in, it's going to complain about the access levels, as we would expect. And again, this is just kind of in the context of our .p, right? It all just kind of hangs together. We'll just take that away. Again, we can build ourselves a parameter object here with properties that will do things, whatever, customer code as character, whatever, nope. 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 Right, we've got a couple of properties there that we may want to serialize. So again, we can do this, make the class serializable, which is great. But generally, when you're working with webby kind of things, you're going to land up going into our good friend the inherits world, and we're going to put in one of our classes here just so I don't have to, so you don't have to suffer through me writing the whole code for you. That will just be awful. But again, inheritance from a pile, JSON serializable's got inheritance from, it's got its own inheritance pile. No, it just implements a class and it's got stuff in it. Do you care what the stuff is? Not really. You just care about what that interface looks like. Get serializable properties, get the object, the read and write. And so this is kind of an approach we use everywhere. But from here now we can say fun things like message, string, my parameter object, to JSON object. This is not going to work right now because we didn't do a particular call. And we will just add our whatever on. So now we can say my parameter object. Okay, and if we run this guy now, this is going to run in character. Ah, yes. We got a JSON object back. Can I spell helper? And I forget the method name. What's your method name, my friend? Nope. So we could show it. Again, I'm not, that's less of the fun part. So we can work with it again in the procedural world. One of the things we'll probably end up doing in procedural world, again, integrating structured error handling into an existing application that has no real concept of the error handling is challenging, because most procedural-based applications have their own form of how do you deal with return values and errors. Right? There's some freely available frameworks out there that try to put some form of throw catch in a procedural world using undo throw, undo, whatever it might be, various ways of doing that. But one of the nice things is we can just catch stuff. Error as and deal with that. One of the things we have to do here is add our block level statement, which just means things get thrown correctly. And this is part of the challenge with implementing this in procedural code, that there is that expectation of a certain behavior in all of those layers and all of those procedures. But we can then catch errors and deal with them as we want to. So that's where my error helper came from. Oh, that didn't put the, that's why. Star. And now you should behave yourself. Right, now we can put that stuff. So there's a show, error message, and we're going to say, oh, error, blah. And now we can see the thing. again, so in procedural code, we can do this sort of stuff. One of the other things that's different in OO from, geez, sorry, I'm just sitting on my cable. One of the things that's different in OO from procedural code, and I kind of touched on it, is in procedural code, you say publish. The publish subscribe events are very loosey-goosey. You can just publish stuff. Publishing is not really the problem, but you can subscribe to stuff that happens anywhere in your session, basically. And you basically just say, here's a method or an internal procedure, go and catch that stuff. In the OO world, strongly typed events are strongly typed. There's a particular signature they need to have. You have to define where they go. There's bits and pieces around that deal with that. So, yeah, so that's one part of it. But the other part is we can subscribe to OO strongly typed events in our procedural code. So again, if you are starting to use something like the Smart Component Library, or you've got your own component framework or your own library of OO code with a number of events in it, you can handle events from the object-oriented code in your procedural code. So, for instance, we have a list collection in the Smart Component Library. It publishes an event every time the list changes, right? So this convention over here is based on the C# convention. There's always a sender who published the event, and then a set of event args. So we can subscribe to that event, and so we need a signature that looks like that, more or less. We're going to say procedure catch event. Oops, come back here. The names don't have to be the same. I'm just being, yes, and I know you don't know where you are yet. Did I not spell parameter right? Input? As E, thank you. Okay, now, come back here. Hello. Now you're going to find. I know, it's my end. Let's just work with end. End is good. Just fewer keys to type. All right. So what we can now do is catch events here, right? So I'm going to define a list as list. That's a popular list. And we are going to say list is new, list name, value, pair judge, here we go. And we can say list, list changed, list changed. Thank you, I heard that. Subscribe, no, list change, subscribe, it's that, list change. This procedure catch. Is it this procedure just catch event? I believe that's the syntax. Why not? Why not indeed? I know why not. Because I'm not running that list. That's unfortunate. So why I'm seeing this error is we have a flag in the framework to decide whether or not to use the newer events, the newer generic lists versus the home-built ones we used until 12.7 or 12.6. And my environment is set up to do that. So that's why the event isn't there. So were the event there, well, we could just do something here, right? Public event, what are we going to call something changed? PC what. Right. One fun thing with events, the publication of them. So when you say this event publish is always private. You can't change it regardless of what the access level of the subscription is. And then we are going to say here, please work. And we are going to say this object send, what did I call my event? Something changed. Publish, whatever hello is. Hey, PC. And we will just change our signature to say as character. Right. And now we can subscribe to that PC what in our runner. Catch event is fine. We don't have a sender. E, PC what? Ay, Judd. Right. An event handler. So now we can subscribe to parameter object. Something. Subscribe. Okay, so that compiles nicely, and we will not subscribe, please work. Subscribe to catch event, my bad. And now we can say, oh, my parameter object, please work. Right, and we can catch this event. And in theory, so what's the betting pool that this will actually work? Good, bad, ugly? But there's our message over there, really, an event handler. Again, just an integration into the object-oriented classes types. We can talk to static stuff. We can talk to objects. We can create them here. And again, this is kind of, we could have the catch event as a, we could just really mess around, but have this as another object. I don't know what we would put there, JSON object. I know that's the JSON object. Again, just for a, you really don't want me to work today, do you? JSON object. I know naming conventions. And that can be new JSON object, just for funsies. Right. And again, right now we're receiving an object, not a character anymore. So often we'll find interactions with the object-oriented piece of the application can talk nicely with the OO side. So there's our object that we received that was just created from the parameter object, and we can work with it in here. So that's pretty handy. I feel like I'm running out of. I feel like I've run out of time. I'm gonna. So I was going to say in the beginning, if you were coming here expecting Mike, you'll have to go to the next session. We'll also say one of the things I've learned while in my time at consulting work is that I am actually capable of running long on sessions. So I apologize for that. Yeah, I think that was kind of, I'm just looking. The other bit, which will take me a little while to put together, but was the catching of procedure handles and looking at that piece of it. Like I say, I try to show the bits today or now that are kind of the basic integrations. The event handling is really powerful because you can then catch and work with stuff. Yeah, and I think that is the time that I have today. So That was excellent timing. Here comes Mike. Because he's here. So thank you very much.